Look, as we know, Matt, the draw's key, and he's got a nice draw there. If he can just make the most of that, I think the style of the race will suit him. He's similar to a few of the horses we brought out here before. You know, the hustle and bustle. I think he'll thrive off of that. And if it gets tight for him down the rail, I think that'll help him even more, because he's one of those horses. You get him squeezed up, he just wants to get out of those holes, and he looks great. He's fresh and well, and as you quite rightly say, he's a good each way player.
Not many prospective Derby horses warm up at the Breeders' Cup, although Aidan O'Brien, of course, has brought loads of juveniles here in the past. Silver Knott is just that. Looked good in the autumn stakes. First of all, why bring him here when he could be a big gun for Epsom next year?
He's a horse that progressed through the season there. Obviously, we saw him in the Solario winning very well. He was disappointing in the Champagne. Ground was the key factor there. I felt the step-upping trip to the mile was always going to suit him. He loved the quick ground there at Newmarket, and he's a horse that had the right profile to come here. And as you quite rightly said, there's no harm in coming here and just hardening him up a little bit more, giving him that bit of experience. You know, could be something like Nation's Pride or Modern Games next year. He'd be a horse that could do plenty of travelling. So why not get him schooled up early on in his career?
You see him as very hard to beat. He's got a hot favourite.
Yeah, he is. I mean, look, it's as we know, Matt, what we've seen so far, everything looks great. His mindset's been good here. That's something that was a little bit of a concern probably 8 weeks ago, was whether he'd mentally be able to take a challenge like this. But so far we've been very pleased, and if he can handle everything on the day, he's obviously a worthy favourite, and yes, he's the one to beat.
Naval Crown and Creative Force go in the turf sprint. Two horses that must feel they're almost married together, to be honest, because they're at a peak, they're very similar horses. I think it's fair to say Creative Force seems to be in slightly better form at the moment, at least going into this. I think the big question for us all is 5.5 furlongs. Are they pacey enough for this?
Creative Force, as you quite rightly say, he's a solid horse and solid at the top level as well. And you know, that's why he's probably closer in the betting than Naval Crown, should I say. The pace will be hot and on the front end for sure. Creative Force, I can just see him. You know, if he can just hold on to the coattails for the first half, he'll come home well. You know, and as we know, if the pace holds up, well, it's going to be a different ball game. But if they go that hard, that last couple hundred yards, they'll be coming back to him and he'll be doing his best work towards the finish there. Naval Crown, pace doesn't worry me with him. I mean, we saw what sort of pace he had in the July Cup. They set some fierce fractions there. As a European horse, he's got an abundance of gate speed. Now, obviously, against the Americans, it might be a bit different. He's obviously, unfortunately, posted out a little bit wider as well. But, you know, the way he's jumped back in Europe and the natural early pace, I think he'll be a horse that should be fine with the conditions of the race. And we'll see where we are. And one thing he'll do is, again, if he can lay up there early doors, he'll maintain it.
Modern Games is already a Breeders' Cup hero. Slightly been in the shadow of Caribus and Native Trail in Europe, but I think that's unfair in many ways because he's such a solid horse, and obviously he's going to be strongly fancied once again.
Yeah, as you're quite right to say, he's sort of, you know, in the spring there, as we all know, is the English Guineas is what everybody's aiming for, and with
You took it.
thankfully, with Native Trail and Caribus, you know, those were the two-figure horses there. But it was take nothing away from Modern Games. You know, had one of those players not been there in the English Guineas, he would have been lining up. But we didn't want to run all three, and so therefore we made the decision that he'd be more suited going to France, and he went and duly obliged there. We tried stepping him up in trip. He put up a solid performance there in the French Derby, but we always felt that coming back in trip was always going to put him back on his A game. And look, he's as always with Modern Games, he's one of those horses you love to travel with because you just know he's going to give everything for you. There's a fantastic run there in the QE2 there on ground that, as William said, from start to finish he hated it, but it's just his sheer determination that he wasn't going to give up. He said had the winner come closer to him, he said it still would have been a very interesting race. But anyway, more importantly, he's come out of the race well. He's got all the attributes. We know what he can do around these tracks, and he's a worthy favourite.
And finally, Charlie, in the turf, Rebels, Romance and Nation's Pride. Interestingly, back home, leading up to the race until about today, Rebels, Romance has been favourite, which I found extraordinary because it kind of meant that the bookmakers felt that you now favour James Doyle over William Buick. How do you pick who? I mean, has Buick picked Nation's Pride? Have you picked Nation's Pride for Buick? How does that work?
We've spoken about it collectively at home there. and myself and William have spoken about both individuals, as well as James. As always, James, he knows his position. He's going to jump on the second string to what William has chosen, but
didn't do him any harm in the Guineas.
No, exactly, this is it, and that's why James is always very comfortable. He doesn't mind what he gets to ride, but the reason that we sort of felt that it's right for William to ride Nation's Pride is the experience he gained during the summer here. We saw him there at Saratoga. We saw him there in the Jockey Club Invitational. He's a neater horse than Rebels Romance, so these tight turns, they're not going to inconvenience him at all. Rebels Romance is 4 from 4 on the turf there, last twice at Group 1 level. He's in great form. He looked fantastic out on the track there this morning, but he's a big, long striding horse, and we're just going to be hoping that he can handle those turns. And it's a mile and a half, so he's got plenty of time to get around them. But if I was lucky enough to be riding one of them, I'd be choosing Nation's Pride as well.
And finally, Charlie, I spoke to Aidan O'Brien the other day, and I have to say I was shocked, because usually trainers sit on the fence, they never give you an exact answer. But Aidan immediately, I said, what's your best, Aidan? He immediately came out with his best hope. What's your number one hope for this Breeders' Cup?
Modern Games.